Alice in Wonderland story. Welcome to Moonsia on moonsia.com. On a hot summer day, Alice and her cute kitten, Dinah, were sitting on a tree branch. And under the tree, Alice's sister was reading the history book out loud. But Alice did not listen to her and was floating in her dreams. A world where rabbits wear clothes and live in small houses. Alice took Dinah and came down from the tree at the same moment. She saw a white rabbit running away, holding a big clock tightly with its paws. "I'm late," Alice said in shock. "How accurate! What can a rabbit be late for?" And she shouted, "Please wait, I will come with you too." But the rabbit continued on his way and kept saying in a loud voice, "I'm late. I'm late," and disappeared in a big hole at the foot of the tree. Alice, whose curiosity was aroused, following the rabbit, she entered the narrow hole with difficulty and began to move inside the tunnel on all fours. Alice suddenly felt that she had fallen from a high place and was falling rapidly. Every moment lower and lower, but fortunately her clothes filled up like a balloon and saved her from falling like a parachute. She was floating in the space of the tunnel and slowly moving forward along the length of the tunnel. On the walls of the tunnel, strange paintings could be seen. The furniture inside was also very strange. Finally, Alice reached the end of the tunnel. The white rabbit was at the end of a long corridor. The tall man who was in the corner of the tunnel hid again. Alice shouted, "Stop!" and ran after him. At the end of the long and narrow corridor, there was a very small door. Alice shook the handle. A voice said, "Hey!" This sound was from the door handle. Alice said, "I'm looking for the white rabbit. Please let me in." The handle replied, "I'm sorry, you are too big. Drink some of that bottle." Alice looked around and found a bottle that said, "Drink me." Alice first tried a few drops of it and then drank it to the last drop. At that moment, Alice started to shrink. She became so small that he could easily escape through the small door. On the other side of the door, Alice was at the beginning of a large forest. Suddenly she saw the white rabbit again from far away among the trees and started running after him. But it wasn't long before two fat and dwarf men, who were completely similar to each other, stood in front of Alice, whose names were similar, and Alice also said her name. "I want to know which way the white rabbit went." Two dwarf men started talking at the same time. Alice could not understand what they were saying, so she decided to choose another direction to continue her movement. Alice arrived at the small house very soon. As she was going to the house, she saw the white rabbit that jumped out of the entrance door of the house. She was wearing a new dress, which was a blouse with a pleated collar. The rabbit shouted again, "Oh my God, I'm late! I'm late!" And he turned to Alice and said, "Go get my gloves." Alice was very excited because the rabbit had talked to her and immediately went inside the house. Alice searched everywhere for her gloves, but instead of that, she found a glass containing some biscuits. The biscuits looked edible and delicious. Then she took one of them and ate it. Suddenly, she started to grow, bigger and bigger, and soon he was bigger than the size of the house. Her hands were bigger than the windows. Alice said to herself, "It is possible that if I find something else and eat it." She stretched out his hands as far as she could and picked a carrot from the garden in front of the house. And when she ate it, Alice began to shrink again. Soon she was so small again that she could pass through the front door of the house. The rabbit was very happy to see that the monster had disappeared and started running again towards the bottom of the garden. Alice also started running after the rabbit. But now, because she was very small, the grass seemed like a huge forest. She suddenly fell asleep hearing a sound. That strange voice asked, "Alice, how are you?" When Alice looked closely, she saw a worm resting under the shade of a mushroom. Alice replied, "I am Alice and I wish to grow taller." The tree worm suddenly turned into a beautiful butterfly and said, "I can help." And he pointed to a mushroom and continued, "One side of this mushroom makes you taller and the other side makes you shorter." And then the beautiful butterfly flew away. Alice went near the mushroom and looked at it carefully. She tried to decide which side might make her taller, but she couldn't. Finally, she took a piece of mushroom from both sides and ate one of the torn pieces. Fortunately, Alice had chosen the right piece, and soon she returned to her normal height. She put another piece of mushroom in his pocket and started walking around when he heard a voice. She turned to the sound. She saw a smiling lip with her teeth showing and a pair of eyes. Alice looked more closely. A strange cat with orange lines appeared in front of her. Alice said, "I am looking for the White Rabbit. Which way should I go?" The cat said, "I am the Cheshire Cat. If I were looking for a white rabbit, I would ask Mad Hatter and March Hare from that side." And he pointed to a road in the forest, and then the cat disappeared. So Alice followed that road, and very soon she heard the singing of Mad Hatter and March Hare. They were drinking tea at a very luxurious table. Mad Hatter said, "We have a non-birthday party because we only have a birthday party one day a year. So we have a non-birthday party for the other 364 days. March Hare asked Alice where she came from, and Alice began to explain. "Everything it started from there when my cat Dinah and I were sitting on a tree branch and suddenly a squealing sound was heard. 'Oh, cat!' And then a little mouse jumped out of the teacup and started running around the table. Mad Hatter called, 'Take it!' At this time, the White Rabbit appeared again and said again, 'There is no time. I'm late,' and disappeared again a little further away. Alice shouted, 'Wait!' and got up from behind the table and ran after him. Alice was tired of passing the strange roads in this wonderland and said to herself, 'I'd better go back home.' But suddenly the Cheshire Cat appeared and said, 'You cannot return home without meeting the Queen.' After saying this, a door opened from the tree near them. Alice went towards it and suddenly found herself in the garden of a big palace. She was surprised to see two playing cards that painted white roses with red paint. The cards explained that the Queen of Aces had ordered red roses, and they were painting the white roses red in hopes that she wouldn't notice. At that moment, the big palace door opened, and the White Rabbit came out in a parade and announced, "The Queen of Hearts," and the king walked towards the rose bush and asked in a serious tone, "Who has turned my roses red?" "Off his head." And then she noticed Alice. While trembling with fear, Alice said, "I am looking for the way back home." The Queen shouted, "The way to your house? All the roads here belong to me." But the Queen quickly changed her mind and asked Alice, "Should I see you playing cricket?" Alice answered, "Yes, Your Majesty." And then the Queen ordered, "Let's start the game." Alice had never seen such a strange cricket game. The hedgehog's balls and rackets were flamingos just when the Queen wanted her flamingo to throw the hedgehog. The Cheshire Cat appeared and the flamingo panicked. In this situation, the Queen lost her balance and fell. She went out of the oven and turned to Alice and shouted, "Off her head." Then everyone went to the court, and Alice was also forced to come to the court. The Queen sat in the seat of the judge. The rabbit said, "Your Highness, the prisoner is accused of cheating in the cricket game." The Queen shouted, "It doesn't matter. She is a criminal. Off her head." At this moment, the king asked, "Can you allow us to invite some witnesses to the stand?" The Queen nodded her head in approval and said, "Very good." But the court is official and continued. The first witness was March Hare, after him and the little mouse, and they followed him for a long time. At the same moment, the Cheshire Cat also appeared. Alice said, "Sir, look at the magic cat." At the same time, the little mouse jumped out of its cup. He ran around the courtroom and all the audience screamed and ran after him. Suddenly, Alice remembered the remaining piece of that mushroom in her pocket and ate a piece of one of its parts. She suddenly began to grow again, bigger and bigger, so that everyone present was horrified. The Queen shouted her head, but before she could finish her sentence, Alice said, "I am not afraid of you. You are just a grumpy old queen." It wasn't until Alice said something that she felt herself getting smaller again. The Queen asked triumphantly, "Well, tell me now, what did you say, my dear?" Alice, who had no other choice, ran away and quickly ran away from the court. But very soon she lost his way in the winding hedges. She still could not hear the Queen's voice, but it seemed that the Queen's voice reached her from a far distance like a dream. Suddenly, Alice heard someone calling her, "Alice, Alice, please wake up." That voice belonged to her sister. "Alice, you slept a lot. Do you remember anything from the history lesson?" Alice rubbed her eyes. Dana curled up under Alice's skirt and fell asleep again. Alice said, "You don't know how excited I was. There was a white rabbit there. I followed him and—" Alice's sister said, "Well, don't think about it anymore. Now we have to go back home. It's time to have tea and dinner." Alice took her kitten and said, Dinah, is it possible that after all that, I am in the real world?